Tonight's topic is the Jewish approach to the paranormal. In fact, we're actually going to do a series of talks relating to topics in the paranormal over the next few weeks. The paranormal, the word paranormal, is a word coined in the early part of the 20th century that refers to any experience not in the natural experience of things. That doesn't have anything that doesn't have a natural explanation. It's a phenomenon that is currently beyond the ability of science to explain. Almost all paranormal experiences or occurrences are generally seen by the public as science fiction or urban legend, but many aspects have been upheld and established by scientific scrutiny. A Gallup poll published in 2005 showed that an astounding 3 out of 4 Americans believe in some sort of paranormal activity, be it a haunted house, telepathy, whatever the case is. 3 out of 4 Americans believe in it. Tonight we're going to zero in on the Jewish idea of ghosts. Now, ghosts are something that have been referenced throughout history, since time immemorial. The ancient Babylonians was discussed in ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt. In ancient Greece, it was mentioned, ghosts were mentioned by Homer in the Iliad and the Odyssey. In the Roman times of later antiquity, we find references to ghosts all the way throughout history until we get to today. So what's Judaism's view on ghosts? Do we believe in them? Does our belief in ghosts, does it have any symmetry to the way that society thinks of ghosts? It's like the white sheet people who make your curtain part and scare you. And it seems kind of interesting also that you come to a synagogue and you're talking about ghosts. Feels like kind of counterintuitive. Come to a synagogue, you talk about Judaism, you talk about things related to Jewish religion, Jewish thought, Jewish law. But ghosts, such a random topic, the paranormal, who would have thought? So ordinarily that might be the case. I've heard in the name of certain Gedolei Yisrael, certain contemporary Jewish sages, that actually encouraged not only the speaking about these topics, but also publishing books on these topics, because sometimes we as Americans, we as people, get so steeped in our material reality, get so hooked on our coarse physical existence that we forget about spirituality or other realms altogether. So at least in a roundabout way, to get the inner machine going, thinking about something beyond the physical world. So they actually encourage speaking about the supernatural, the paranormal, ghosts, etc. We should know, and don't look over your shoulder, we should know that we happen to live in a very busy atmosphere. There's a lot going on, even in this room, that we're not always aware of. We know for a fact that going through this room right now, there's microscopic bacteria, there's radio and TV waves, there's cell phone and internet signals, and then there's spirits, and then there's souls. Many people, when they think about a soul, when they think about the human soul, they look at it almost in the opposite of the way that it really is. Most people think that we are our bodies. When I think about me, I think of my body. And I happen to possess a soul. I am a body that happens to possess a soul that enlivens me, my body. In truth, it's the exact opposite. We, who's the real we, who's the real me, is a soul. The real me is a soul. And the real me was a soul created at the beginning of time. My soul happens to occupy a body. Our souls happen to occupy a body right now. But the real you, the real me, the real us, is the soul. It's sort of like when an astronaut goes to outer space, they start floating around, they do their work on the space station, whatever they're doing, they need to put on a spacesuit. In order to function in that, to be exposed to those elements, they have to put on special equipment. They have to put on a special space suit. It works the same way when the soul comes down to this world. In order to be a part and influence physical reality, you need to don physical clothing. You have to put on the garb of a body in order to experience the physical world. You know, anyone ever attended a funeral before? Or anyone ever mourned a loved one knows that according to Jewish law, you're supposed to rip your garment. You tear your garment as a sign of mourning. Now, aside from a way of expressing grief, the deeper reason behind that is to remind us that what has been lost is only the body. Only the body has been torn away. Only the garment has been torn away. But the soul remains and the soul continues on. So when the soul leaves the body, it exists on a different plane. Sometimes, many times, the soul immediately is able to go to Gan Eden, to heaven, to the godly spiritual realm. Sometimes it needs to get purged from different infractions that it may have had throughout its life and get to a certain point of purity where it will be able to experience that godly glow, that godly experience. Other times it's sent back down into a body in order to fix up something that it needs to correct. And then there are times where the soul wanders the world without a designated body. The soul lingers on without a body. So a ghost, in the context that we're going to be discussing it tonight, that we are discussing it tonight, is a departed soul who, for whatever reason, continues on in the physical world rather than ascending on high. It continues lingering in the world. One thing that's very interesting, for quite some time, the British Society of Psychical Research has conducted serious investigation onto the reality of ghosts. Most reports of ghosts happen to be either illusions or not hallucinations, but you see an apparition that's caused by light hitting the window at a certain angle and people. But, however, many cases have been verified as seemingly a real occurrence. And now, this British Society of Psychical Research is a community of scientists, renowned, verified, veteran scientists who are doing these investigations, not some quack group that's witch doctors and trying to prove a point about metaphysics. These are real people, real investigations, hard scientific data. Through their investigations, certain cases where ghosts were reported that ghosts were reported as the result of a certain sudden or tragic death of a person, for example. So the testimony of feeling something by many different people, a variety of people, all their stories and all their things that they perceived and experienced all matched up. These are, again, were in cases of people who had died suddenly or tragically. In one investigation, a dog, a cat, and a rattlesnake all reacted to a certain unoccupied chair in a supposedly haunted house in Kentucky. The extrasensory perception of animals, we know, is very great. Animals sense things that human beings don't sense at all. We often look at ourselves, and we should look at ourselves this way, as we are the crux, the height of existence. We're the top of the scale, human being. A human being is so high that he's able to, given the right scenario, he's able to even communicate and uplift the world, communicate with God through prophecy, if he became such a degree. Animals can't become prophets. Animals can't uplift the world. So we often look at ourselves as we are the head honchos of the world, and we are. But when it comes to sensitivity of perception, using our senses to sense what's there, sometimes animals have a greater deal and have a greater capability than even us on a normal operation. Why is that? Sometimes we get so... We have in our mind, we have in our box what is considered reality and what's considered fantasy, and only certain things that fit within our bubble are processed by our brain. Whereas animals are able to process and they can hear and feel other things that we are not, or we are desensitized to, or don't have the capability of experiencing on our own. Remember the tsunami last year in Japan? And the tsunami that happened also in Southeast Asia in 2004? There was reports that the animals were able to somehow, one way or another, sense that something was coming. They saw the animals behaving differently a few days before and going to different areas. We know that dogs have a remarkable sense of smell, that birds migrate based on celestial cues, and that bats are able to retrieve their food through using echoes. So there's no question that animals have an extra bit of sensory perception than human beings do. The truth is, it doesn't matter if animals recognize it through a sixth sense, an actual sixth sense that humans don't have, or whether it's just a heightened sense of awareness, that something that we do have, they just have a more sensitive to it. Whatever the case may be, they have been receptive to these spiritual apparitions that human beings sometimes weren't able to perceive right away. Feel the different vibration in the air, whatever the case was, animals were able to sense it sometimes where a human being couldn't. Sometimes when a human will experience, they'll go into a place that there is such a presence. They won't feel that there's another person in the room. They'll feel almost like there's a presence, or a certain tingly feeling, or whatever. But you know that feeling that you get where when someone's looking at you from behind, and you just kind of know someone's looking at you, and you turn around and there is someone looking at you? Where does that sense come from? Where does that sensitivity? So many people who have had this experience describe their experience with a ghostly apparition or a ghostly presence in a similar way. There seems to be validation in the writing of the Jewish mystics on some of the conclusions that this research team has made. There's works in Jewish literature that discuss, there is such an idea, that a sudden or tragic death hurls the soul, at least for a temporary amount of time, into a continued existence in this world. The premature death, so to speak, causes the bodiless soul to continue occupancy in this world, where it lingers and tries to accomplish the mission that it hasn't yet accomplished. The mission, it was set here for a certain mission. Its life was cut off tragically and suddenly, and it continues to perpetuate that goal of which it was sent here for initially. There is such an idea. There's also reference to being without a body, living in this world as a certain form of punishment. A person comes down numerous times, numerous tries to correct different things, and after X amount of times aren't successful, that for a certain amount of time they have to go without a body. And they're constantly pursued, but the physical forces, the spiritual forces that they're interacting with help refine it and make it prepared to go enter the next world. So there is an idea that's expressed in certain texts about the guf dak, the ethereal body, that not only do you have a physical body, but you almost have like some sort of ethereal, spiritual image of you. What's interesting is that oftentimes people who have undergone near-death experiences, they describe their body during that time as that ethereal mass of energy in the form of their body. Perhaps this ethereal mass of energy, this massive body, is what people see when they have an apparition of a spiritual force or a ghost. There's a trace of the soul that always remains with the body. So it can be seen even scientifically that the hair continues to grow even after the person is buried, the nails continue to grow, cells continue to duplicate. Not for a long, long time after, but it continues to happen even after the person has passed. We all intrinsically realize, and it's very much a part of our tradition, that there's always a remnant of the soul that stays with the body. How many of us have gone to a cemetery to visit a loved one? Now, if we didn't believe that the essence, the soul, who the person really was, remained with them, we're just going to see their body, their headstone? No, we know that there is a certain connection, there's a certain spiritual force, aspect of the soul that always remains with those bodies, with our bodies. There's an ancient Jewish custom to even invite relatives who have passed to family celebrations that are coming. Person's getting married, for example. You invite great-grandma, even though great-grandma may no longer be among the living. Biblically, King Saul has an encounter with a ghost. King Saul disobeys the command of God regarding the war of the Amalekites. And the prophet Samuel, passes away as well. So all of King Saul's means of communication to the upper worlds through kosher means were cut off. So he has this war coming up with the Philistines, and he needs to get some advice that's beyond what his generals can tell him. So he goes and he finds a witch, and together they conjure up the deceased soul, the ghost of the prophet Shmuel, who he seeks to ask questions from. Now, this behavior is completely forbidden in Jewish law. King Saul did the wrong thing. But it's forbidden, that doesn't mean that it's not true. The idea of conjuring up spirits and speaking to spirits, it's completely usher, it's completely not allowed, but there is such an idea. Such an idea does exist. So we don't participate in seances. We don't take out the old Ouija board and try and talk to whoever, conjuring up spirits. But the idea that the spirit lives on and that the spirit influences the world is very much a true thing. And those nations who do practice this witchcraft, which again we are forbidden to, at one point it was a true thing. These days, if you see it, if someone claims that they can do it, it's usually not true. 99.99% of the time, you're just dealing with either someone who's fooling themselves, or at worst, a con artist who's trying to take your money. At one point it was true. The traditions of how they used to do it have been completely lost from any society in the world today. But the idea, the general idea, the concept of continuing on a communication after passing is a real thing that can exist. Anyone want to hear a ghost story? A ghost story from Jewish tradition. and in not so distant history. I feel like I should take a flashlight to my face with that. This is a beautiful story. Sometimes one who has passed can reveal himself in this world. And there are many different stories, even in Jewish context, of this taking place. Now, we don't believe, Jew has to be critical. Jew has to be analytical. We can't just accept any random story. Oh, look, I heard a story. If it comes from a valid person, a legitimate source, then we can consider, we believe it. But not just any random Joe who, decides they're going to publish their story in the newspaper, I saw a ghost. So it happens to be a very, very interesting story, witnessed firsthand by Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. This story takes place in Hungary, the end of the 1800s, the end of the 19th century. This was when Rabbi Yosef Chaim was a student in the Ksav Sefer Yeshiva. The story goes as follows. There was a woman, she had a husband, but she took on a project. They took on the project together. The husband was a businessman, and the wife took on this project of researching, looking towards people who didn't have anybody to say Kaddish for them. She would organize it with their names and whatever. She'd get their information. And her and her husband together would pay the yeshiva, they would pay the boys in the yeshiva students, to make sure that someone was always saying Kaddish for these people, and that their soul should be able to experience the greatness of what it means to say Kaddish. They didn't have it. These are people, again, who they didn't have anyone to say Kaddish for them, and she arranged that they would have. They paid a certain sum of money, and these boys were able to continue saying it throughout the year. Now, came a point where the husband passed away, and he was the main provider in the family, and the wife fell on hard times. And the times were so hard that, she had daughters who were getting ready to get married, and she didn't have money to make a dowry. She begged the yeshiva at the same time, said, listen, we don't have any money anymore, but I still want to take this responsibility of providing Kaddish to be said for those who don't have one to say for them. Please, I beg you, we've paid you in the past, please continue this holy work. So the yeshiva agreed, no problem, and they continued saying Kaddish. Meanwhile, again, this woman is destitute. Her daughters are getting married, she has no money. So she's walking in the street one day, and a man approaches her, and they speak a little bit, and the man identifies with her and her situation, says, listen, I want to help you. You look like, you're on the right, you look like you're doing the right things. You look like you really need it. An honest woman, a good woman. I really want to help you. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. How much money do you think you're going to need? And I'm going to write you a check for it. So the woman is flabbergasted. Wow. So she says a certain sum of money, and the man pulls out his checkbook, writes it right away for it, and the man says to her, listen, because it's such a large sum of money, when you're going to take this to the bank tomorrow, I don't want anybody to think that, this is a forgery. That you got a check from me somehow and you wrote my name on it. And because it's such a large sum of money, I would prefer, for your own sake, if we can get maybe some boys from the yeshiva to come witness that this is taking place. That way, when you go to cash the check later on, it will have some testimony that I gave it to you, I signed it, and whatever. So she says, fine. So they got two boys from the yeshiva. One of them was Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. And they witness, they see, fine. So the next day, the woman goes to the bank. And she says, I'd like to cash this check. So the clerk at the bank looks at the check and it's like looking at her, and something's not adding up. So she brings it to the back, to the big boss. The boss is the president, he's the owner of the bank. And so he comes out and he says, "Come with me." Now, he thought that there's some sort of, funny business, some sort of forgery going on over here. Sit down in the office. Said, "Excuse me, where did you get this check from?" Said, I was walking down the street yesterday, and a man came over to me and he said he wanted to help me, and he just wrote me out this check. It was to help me. And he said, "Yeah, right. Tell me the truth. I don't. This is way too much. Describe the man who gave it to you." So she describes him, what he looks like, his personality, and she says, "Wait, I also have boys from the yeshiva who witnessed. The man was very concerned that no one was going to believe, and I have boys from the yeshiva who also witnessed the man give me the check." So the boys come, the woman comes, and the bank manager asks the boys, "Would you be able to identify this man who?" They said, "Yeah, we remember him. We saw him yesterday, wasn't it?" So he points to a picture on the wall, and they all say, "Oh, that's the man. That's the man who wrote the check." He says, "That's my father. He's been dead 20 years." Now, the bank clerk, the president, said to them, "I believe you, though. And the reason I believe you is because last night my father came to me in a dream and called him by his name, and says, 'You went away from our tradition. You went away from our religion. You got caught up in the world, and you didn't say Kaddish for me.' Every time that this woman organized that Kaddish be said, my soul was able to ascend in heaven. My soul was able to experience the bliss of what it means to have Kaddish said for it. Thanks to this woman, I was able to get where I need to go. I had to repay her. So I'm going to give her a check, and I need you to cash it." So he had his doubts. He had long since abandoned religion, but he cashed the check. He took from his own money, and he later became an observant Jew. Who wouldn't? In a much more recent times, I've told some of you in the past, I worked for Broward County Hospice, and one of the pillars seen in recent years of end-of-life work is a woman named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, psychiatrist. So she also was for many years not a believer in the afterlife, and she describes one patient who she calls Mrs. Schwartz, who came to her after she had passed in the hospital or wherever it was, who came to her, appeared to her, and she was in such disbelief that she said, "Sign your name on the paper." The paper was corroborated later with the family that this is her signature. She was really. So we see that there's more to the world than meets the eye. We see that there is an entire spiritual dimension, most of the time, which we're completely unaware of. The idea for us, what's the practical message we can take out of this idea of the soul and the spirits and ghosts? We have to do our best in life to be the best Jews that we can be. To do as many mitzvahs as we can do. Not to be so focused on the afterlife, but be focused on this life. What can I do? What more mitzvah can I do? But also to have in the back of our mind the awareness that there's more to life than meets the eye. This idea that there's more to life than meets the eye will motivate our spiritual pursuits. These facts, these stories, and there's a slew of stories. There's many other stories of righteous individuals, holy people coming back at a time that was needed, appearing even in a physical way to help somebody. So these are very real and very known and not that uncommon of occurrences. So with this added this added information, that there's more to life than meets the eye, let's take it in a practical sense and use it to enhance our spiritual pursuits.
Click subscribe to see more exclusive content for the most sought-after Jewish speakers, teachers, and thinkers.